Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. This podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And I'm pleased to welcome Paris Ortiz Wines. She is the Global Director of Stand Up for Nuclear. Paris, welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Very excited.
Now, I didn't warn you. We talked about a couple other things, but guests on this podcast introduce themselves. And I know you've had some of your colleagues and friends on the podcast, Mark Nelson, Emmett Penny, Maddie Hilly, among them. So imagine you've arrived somewhere. You have about 60 seconds to introduce yourself. No one there knows who you are. Please
Okay.
tell us who you are.
Wonderful. So, as you said, Paris Ortiz Wines. I'm a global organizer that does the grassroots advocacy for the pro-nuclear movement, and we work on advocating for the protection and expansion of nuclear energy around the world. So, I work with advocates in many countries, working from those that don't even have nuclear plants to those that maybe would like to save them. And it is a funny place I find myself in this career because I studied environmental studies, had no energy or engineering background, and wasn't exposed to nuclear energy. And now I found myself advocating for this technology for the last 5 years.
Well, so how did you get there then? I'm just curious because I don't. I've followed your work for some time. As I said, we have many mutual friends and acquaintances. But how did you get here? I mean, and if you don't mind, so I'm just, you don't mind me asking, how old are you? And you said you've been doing this you started 5 years ago on this. How did you get here?
Yeah, so I am 28. So once I attended the University of Santa Cruz. I did environmental studies there. I did not focus in any particular section of that degree and thought that if I just came to the Bay Area, I would find my niche. I would find an organization that had a great purpose. So in fact, I applied to the Sierra Club, the NRDC, Earth Justice, Legal. Like I applied to all the standard, what I thought was environmental. What is an environmental organization? But luckily, I did get my first big girl job at a nonprofit called Environmental Progress, and that was led by Michael Schellenberger. So as many of your listeners know, he was one of the first people in the U.S. that was pro-nuclear. He came from the left. He had done the work that I would identify with. So I watched his TED Talk as part of the interview process on why he changed his mind. And because I don't have any baggage, I didn't even know we had a nuclear plant. I had no association with any of the Cold War apocalyptic weapons thing. So for me, I was instantly hooked. So I got my start with Michael, worked there for 2 years, and then have branched off to do Stand Up for Nuclear full time.
And Stand Up for Nuclear is a nonprofit, is that right?
Right now it's a fiscal sponsoree and is in its process of becoming an official nonprofit.
And tell me about your budget. How much are you spending per year roughly?
That's a good question. So we have some donors from Patreon. So some of our actions can vary from it's just me giving my time, whether it's like a phone baking action and I'm doing all the templates, or on the other end where we do international events like the one in Berlin in Germany. And those can range from a couple hundred to a couple thousand, depending on how big we'd like to go. And unfortunately, because our budget isn't as big, we're not able to do as many big events, but we're able to slowly piece out some aid when we can. So I would say a couple thousand is our operating budget at the moment, because a lot of people volunteer their time. And what I can do is volunteer my time as a person.
But on an annualized basis, then, can you give me an idea about that? What you're spending on an annual basis? Because you mentioned Sierra Club, NRDC, and I'm very interested in the money issues because these are massive organizations. Sierra Club's a couple $100 million, famously anti-nuclear. NRDC, again, famously anti-nuclear. You're nowhere near that size, but are less than 100,000, a couple 100,000 a year. Is that what do you?
Oh, nowhere near. So if we're looking at just if we're doing our events and actions, I would say maybe 25, 30.
Right. But you're being paid, or you're the global director. So I'm assuming you're being compensated some way. Don't spend too much time on this, but yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just in your history, though, you sound like put it this way, the accidental pro-nuclear activist. Is that, I don't mean to demean it or anything, but that sounds, if I'm reading it back to you, that's what it sounds like.
Yes. I didn't foresee myself going into anything with energy. I thought that was something To be honest, I thought that was something that was too complex and too over my head, that I wouldn't go into energy, that there were other sectors of the environmental space that I would be able to succeed in. I didn't think, because of my background, that I should go into that in energy. And so when I came across nuclear energy with this nonprofit, for me, it was, this is the one thing I can advocate for. This is my hope. This is the one thing that I can really push and actually make a difference, instead of all the little things that I continue to do, but don't really add up to a lot at the end of the day.
Well, so you mentioned those other groups. I mean, so how has your view on environmentalism changed? I mean, you're from Santa Barbara, in a very famously Democratic state. You get in UC Santa Cruz, which is a famously liberal university. The mascot is the banana slug, if I'm,
Yes, yes.
remembering correctly. That this is the well, I don't like to use the term green anymore, but it is the environmentalism epicenter, right, in
Yes.
terms of California. How do you view mainstream environmentalism now? I mean, how does that change? How has that changed since you graduated from college 6 years ago? How does that? How's your worldview changed?
Yeah. Back in college, I subscribed to the notion that small is beautiful, and that for us to reharmonize with nature and to redeem ourselves and to mitigate climate change, we were going to need a massive cultural shift. And that would mean,
Going back to the land, the whole,
yeah,
40 acres and a mule and organic farming. And then is
yeah,
that like that you're saying? Is
yeah,
that
like live a little smaller, use, and when I think back on it, it was a romantic notion, and I was just, all these little things that would add up is like, turn off the water, like when you brush your teeth, turn off the water, then we're going to recycle, and then I'm going to be vegan, and then I could do all these individualistic things, and then I'm going to make everybody else do it as well, and we're all going to be back to like a co-op kind of setting a little bit, and we're to do a circular economy. But I don't know how it's powered, because
was there a VW bus in this? I mean, it sounds, I'm joking, but it sounds, I mean, it's almost cliche now when you're recounting this. I mean, to me, I'm,
yeah,
significantly older than you are, but as I listen to you, I mean, it's almost, I'm not going to say funny, but I mean, it is stereotypical. Is that, I mean,
yes. Yeah, it is. But I will say that there was, underneath that was just a sadness and a fear of what was to come. I didn't know what the world was going to look like, because you see those beautiful documentaries of where they go to see where the ice caps are melting, and then they show, a certain animal population that's dying, and you're just like, what are we doing? It a deep sense of just regret and feeling that humans are parasites. And with nuclear, and of course with Michael's thinking, and of course the coworkers that I was surrounded by, they were able to offer me a different vision of what that could be like, and to also remind us that I think we get a little spoiled living in such, first of all, living in such a beautiful, rich country, and then me living in California, which is one of the best states personally, and then at least if we're looking economically, we're one of the largest. And I I believe we forget what it's like to not have basic needs, and
yeah,
to,
right.
like others, maybe living in different countries. So all that to say, they were able to remind me that humans are pretty cool, and then we've done a really great progress as far as human flourishing, and that now we have had success stories of, when we've seen where we believe we're reaching a tipping point in a fishery, and then we conserve, and then we bring it back. So I was able to have a more positive outlook. It gave
Right.
me a positive vision and how to get there.
That's it's so you've had a conversion story. I mean, and it's interesting. And a long time ago, I remember someone who's in Catholic terms, they're, oh, converts are the worst kind. They're, but this idea of going, you said the feeling that humans are parasites to this different worldview. I think that's really, I mean, it's kind of beautiful in a certain way, but let's move past that, because I want to talk about it. There's a lot of things to talk about, but since I didn't know your own story, I think it's really relevant to why you care, right? That this is now you had a conversion, and now you've gotten that conversion has given you motivation. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yes.
So tell me about what happened on Earth Day in San Francisco. Stand Up for Nuclear, as I understand it, had some conflict with the organizers there. What happened?
Yeah. And so to give background, right? Earth Day was started in Santa Barbara. I've grown up going to Earth Days. I thought there was such a cool festival where there's new ideas. You can get, your bamboo forks and knives, and you can see the new solar panel that they're releasing. So for me, I was like,
the bamboo forks and knives.
yeah,
That's go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. Go
all
ahead.
of it. And then stickers and face tattoos. So the vibe is there. We wanted to go to Earth Day. So background story on the initiative that we've started in San Francisco. We have a great core active group of advocates that fought for Diablo Canyon and continue to fight for more nuclear. Last year, we did attend under our friends banner, Safe Clean Energy, Isotopes organization, because Stand Up for Nuclears was denied. They said our name was too controversial. So we went last year, had a great time, great conversations. So this year we applied under the same name with the same initiative, same people. And unfortunately, after weeks of our application being accepted and our fee had been paid, they give me a call saying, hey, actually, we believe, as the organizers of SF Earth Day, we do not want nuclear energy to be represented. It's too controversial. And more alongside the waste issue. And keep in mind, these individuals are, I believe, in the boomer generation, predominantly demographic is white. So I was a bit frustrated. And so we did give them an opportunity. We sent them an email saying we'd love to chat with you for you to explain your views, to explain what the hangups are and why you don't want nuclear there. No response. So we decided we were going to put this story out to journalists who would like to pick it up. And then we were still going to go to Earth Day. So basically we went, brought the good vibes. We were playing Doja Cat and ABBA, and we were dancing. We had stickers, and we set up right in front of SF Earth Day. And so whenever
you crashed SF Earth Day, you're the
yes,
the wedding crash,
yes,
wedding crashing to Earth Day.
We were crashing to support and say that we support you, but nuclear needs to be included. So we posted up right out front. So everybody that passed to go into the event had to see us. And so actually some people did come up to us saying, actually, I saw your article. I saw that you were disinvited. I'm still glad that you came. I actually came to see you guys. I had seen the article about Earth Day when they were researching it. And we had 2 TV news stations come up to us, intrigued by our signs, intrigued by the pro-nuclear stickers, and we were able to get on the local 5:00 news talking about nuclear energy.
So being denied was actually, in some ways, it was kind of some jujitsu here that made it even better for you than had you been accepted. And their objection was over the nuclear waste issue. That was their claim, that was the problem why they couldn't allow you in.
Yeah, so when the journalists reached out to them for a comment when they were writing the story, it was more alongside, oh, what about the waste? What about, the accidents, the classic hangups for people, and specifically that generation. Unfortunately, we didn't get to chat with them, but we did get to chat with one of the staff members of the committee that was running the event, and he actually had protested Diablo Canyon and came up to us and said, I'm actually changed my mind. I don't think that was a good idea. I'm pretty open to it. And he was one of the original I would say not advocates, activists against Diablo Canyon. And I got that he chatted with us for a bit.
Well, so it's one of the questions I have here, but I was going to ask it later, but you said that it was the organizers were older. You said they're boomers. Okay, yeah. Well, I'm a boomer, right? I was born in 1960. What is the generational difference? It's something I asked Maddie Hilly, and I think is quite interesting in terms of the change in, I'll say, your generation. So are you a millennial, Gen Z? I get all my different.
I'm millennial. Yeah. So Maddie and I are millennials.
Okay. So what is the difference between how millennials view nuclear energy compared to baby boomers?
So in my experience, my generation has no concept of nuclear energy. It's neither good nor bad. It is just neutral. And if they have heard of nuclear energy, I think the third word association, like many, is weapons or bomb. That was our association. I didn't even know we had a nuclear plant in California until I started working with Michael. I didn't even know nuclear energy produced electricity It just didn't come up. It just wasn't something you talked about. So in my experience, many millennials have no baggage. Their biggest fear is climate change, right? And back in the day with the previous generation, for them, nuclear had been this beautiful promise earlier, and then there was this counter push against weapons. The accidents happened, the environmental movement was happening at that same time. So they were just fed a lot of images and created this collective, I would say, experience about nuclear energy. And it wasn't great. And to be honest, I think I would be anti-nuclear if I had been born back in that generation, because I would have subscribed to, I'm an environmentalist and that's bad. We don't know what's going to happen. Why are we creating this waste? Radiation is this scary, invisible thing that could cause me cancer. So for them, fear induced around nuclear energy view. Millennials, there's nothing. It's neutral.
That's interesting. I think that the no baggage is, I think that's part of it, because when I was in grade school, high school, well, there were fallout shelters. I mean, people had bomb shelters. I mean, this was a thing when I was a kid, and that fear of nuclear war, nuclear annihilation was very much part of the consciousness. And so I like that idea that millennials have, as you say, have no baggage. But let's jump back from, okay, so we've talked about Earth Day SF and how actually it was good for you. But bring us up to speed on, I've been watching the nuclear sector for a while. I've been adamantly pro-nuclear, for 13 years, end to end, natural gas to nuclear. This has been my thing for a long time. But bring us up to speed now, and where you were in, you were in Berlin in Germany. Yeah. In April, and this was protesting the imminent shutdown of the last 3 nuclear reactors in Germany. But those reactors closed. Tell me what your demonstration was about, and I guess the other question is, will those reactors, is it possible Germany will bring those reactors back online?
Yeah. So yeah, on April 15th, 3 reactors, the last of the German, were closed down. So there's a group of organizations in Europe that have been fighting for the past 5+ years, before even my time. So the local group that we partnered with is Nuclearia, and they're a group of Germans that have been protesting all of these closures and have had some effective actions and events. Now, this event, we wanted to not have a memorial or a funeral, because obviously it is sad that we are losing these reactors. But like you mentioned, there is a possibility that they can be turned back on, physically and as far as regulation goes. So our demonstration was more of a celebration, of thanking of the reactors, and to also make a stance that we don't want them to close. We aren't celebrating this closure. And to put in perspective, we were on the Brandenburg Gate on one side. On the other side, there was a classic environmental group, Greenpeace, setting up their nonsense art visual, fear-mongering with yellow radioactive waste barrels with a dead dinosaur, and they were celebrating, but you could visibly see the stark differences. All of the individuals on the Greenpeace side were 50 and older, and all of the individuals on our side were from different countries and all younger. I would say all under the age of 65. Majority.
So that's interesting. So you said that the people in your group were mainly 20s, 30s. You said, I just want to make sure that.
Yeah. So we're looking at, we had one of our youngest one from the demonstration that spoke was a 14-year-old, and one of our oldest members is 65+, but our range is between late 20s to late 35. Right. We're right in that range.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I follow the money. This is the oldest axiom, one of the oldest axioms in politics, at least since Watergate, right? Mm-hmm. Greenpeace is a huge organization, international budget, $300 million. And here you're working on a shoestring and a lot of volunteers coming. And I'm just looking at your website here. So Stand Up for Nuclear, your affiliate organizations, Canada, Philippines, Italy, Slovenia, Sweden, France, Estonia, Poland, Denmark, South Korea, Norway, Indonesia, Taiwan, Germany, Netherlands, South Africa, Belgium, Ireland. There is a large group of constituents, and a lot of people, they're just motivated, right? This isn't some, check writing effort and a lot of fundraising around this. Right. But it seems that the motivation is one that comes from a as you say, a more forward-looking, and even well, there was a quote from you, and I want to return to this generational thing because I think this is one of the key strengths, I think, of the pro-nuclear movement is that it is being led by people who are younger, and that there's a more, I think, a durable passion there. You said no longer is nuclear seen as a costly liability, but rather as a multi-generational asset essential to achieving a resilient energy system. And I like this idea of multi-generational asset because it's about something that a durable, and Matty Hilly talks about this as well, these are investments that will last for decades or even century potentially, and that's a very forward-looking and very positive kind of outlook as opposed to the gloom and doom of the anti-nuclear crowd. Does that does that what I'm saying there? Does that make sense to you, or how do you think about this?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was writing that piece, when I wrote that sentence, it just felt so true to me because if I'm to look at how we're going to do a clean energy just transition where it's affordable and it's bringing everybody and it leaves no one out. And if we're just looking at a standpoint of sustainability, why aren't we making things built to last? And so you don't have to replace them as often. We want to build things that we can be using for multi-generations. And if we look at solar and wind, that won't be happening. And not to say that you can't do them, only to say, a lot of people are like, we can't do nuclear because it's taking away from solar and wind. When none of us are saying that, when you can do both. But if we're looking at a standpoint, I want, you pay for what you get. And I'd like to have something that lasts.
That rhymes with me as well because in Puerto Rico, we went after Hurricane Maria, and the solar plants, we went to one building and all of the solar panels were just ripped off the roof of this. They were stacked inside because they'd been blown off the roof, or they took them down because they'd been damaged. And so, and these wind projects, a lot of them are having to be repowered. The turbines are falling, they're aging out. They're having to be landfilled. And batteries is the other part of this. What are you going to do with all these lithium ion batteries, which is, this is a waste issue that's not being thought about in terms of this durability issue. So, but I want to return to this idea about you went from kind of this idea of humans as parasites to a much more pro-human, pro-nuclear standpoint. And I think that match of those two to me is intriguing and one of the most interesting parts of this new generational shift. Is that a commonality among all these groups? This more of a pro-human kind of look at where we're going?
I would say it's a mixed view. I would find that some younger individuals, I would say maybe Gen Zers, I don't think they are on the same train that I'm riding where humans are good. I think they're still stuck in, climate change is happening and we're not acting fast enough, and humans are being selfish and we're not doing enough. And I understand that point of view. They're not to where I'm at yet. They haven't gone through that evolutionary. And I think the older generation, some of the older generation are like, we just have too many people,
Right.
and we just,
the Malthusians.
yeah. And I think once you get our energy levels to where we need, then we can do efficiency, and then we can figure out how to best use all of our resources. But we're not even, nearly 700 million people still don't have access to electricity.
Right.
I don't even know how we're talking about that yet. And you live in a rich society. So don't be pushing your stuff on others. So I'm on the pro-human. And I think I like the globalization, and I know that there's downsides, but there has been a lot of upsides as well. The connectivity that we've been able to have with all of these people that live in different countries, I think is beneficial, not only for my soul, but also for our countries and our future humanity, what that looks like.
So let's talk about the global vision then for nuclear and global situation in terms of the progress for nuclear. You were in Germany, and I did a short video on it. It's just the closure of those nuclear plants to me is just staggeringly stupid. I mean, what is Germany thinking? I mean, where's your strategic sensibility now, particularly given the Russian invasion of Ukraine, et cetera? But here's the question. So which countries do you think are, handicap it for me, which countries do you think are the ones that are going to build new nuclear reactors the soonest?
Yeah. So UK has done a really good job with Hinkley Point C. They recently just classified nuclear as green in their taxonomy. So for them, they're going to continue doing nuclear. I think the government is backing that. And as we know, you can't be half in with nuclear. You need to be fully 100% committed, and government help does help. So the UK is doing really good. Poland's looking like, I mean, Poland's excited. They're they are, I believe, the top coal country right next to Germany. And they are in a deal with us, with Westinghouse, to build some AP1000s. And they just released an image of what the possible new AP1000 might look like today on Twitter. So for them, they're excited. They want energy. So I think for the big reactors that are going to be financed from the US, Poland's looking great. Then we're looking at Canada, GE Hitachi. If we're looking at small reactors, I mean, they've already broken ground, I believe. They are continuing to maintain their fleet, so they're doing good. Argentina is hoping to get financing from China for their Hulang 1. That's been, I would say, 2+ years delayed because of economic hardship and financial hardship. The UAE is signing new contracts with other countries to possibly build more nuclear. And as we know, they are a great success story. Of course, there's other factors that go into why the UAE has succeeded. 4 reactors, 25% of their electricity, on budget, on time, like chef's kiss. Like they've done it. They did good.
I like that, chef's kiss.
You know?
And that's the Baraka nuclear plant, which is now one of the largest in the world, built by the South Koreans, SK Power, if I'm remembering right. And that
Yes.
is 4 gigawatts, something like that. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. So
No,
Canada, Argentina, UAE, Poland, UK, keep
yes.
going.
Then we have Philippines. Last year, they included nuclear energy in their energy portfolio. Looking forward, what are the options?
Right.
They are now in talks about bringing the Bataan nuclear plant online. It was never on, it never came online. It was mothballed. So that's one of the possibilities. Indonesia has just included nuclear energy in their energy portfolio. Then we're looking at Estonia. Fermi Energia is doing great work. GE Hitachi would be the choice for them. So I think they would be another country deploying that SMR. And as we know, GE Hitachi, its technology, it's a bit proven more so than the other designs that we're seeing.
And this is the BXR 300, which is the same one that is being deployed now in Canada at the Darlington. Is that right?
Darlington.
Okay,
Yes.
right. So 300 megawatt reactor. Well, so since we're talking about 300 megawatt reactors, we also had just in the last few days, Westinghouse announced AP 300, which is a shrunk down version of the AP 1000. You mentioned that. Do any of these reactor designs, I mean, if you're looking at them from a deployment standpoint, or, is there a chemistry that you like better than another? Do you think the light water designs are going to be more likely to succeed than like X Energy and the gas cooled design? Do you have can you handicap that for me?
So when I got into this space, I had to learn what a nuclear reactor was, the different types, and what was working. And for me, I just take it from an outsider perspective, looking at what do countries have now? What has been working? Have they tried the advanced reactors? And the US did a lot of trials with different types of reactors, but because of economics and other factors, they decided to go with the big ones. And so for me, I'm for any of them that are breaking ground and getting built on time, on budget. And you know what? I'm fine. If it's the first of its design, there will be some hiccups. I understand that. I just I'm a little hesitant on the pressure and the hypeness around these advanced reactors, because it really bothered me that many of them, their pitch is it's better than the old ones. It's going to be safer. It's going to be cheaper when you haven't even built it. Okay. So I'm like, if I can see it with my own eyes and it's doing it, I'm for you. I will be your biggest advocate. So if we're looking at the global scene, I really like GE Hitachi's 300. I'm really excited that Westinghouse has come out with a small one, the 300, because it shows commitment. They're interested and they're going to go for nuclear. And that's what we need. And I think looking at the advanced pathway in the United States, NuScale's up at the top, but then we have Kairos. Oklo took a hit a bit. So I'm for them. I just talk with some reservation. I want them to break ground and actually get their license, and then I'm for you. But
so, well, that's interesting because you brought it back to the U.S., and that was one of the questions I wanted to put to you as well. So, does nuclear then? And Mark Nelson put it this way, and I think it's pretty accurate that we don't in the U.S. we have cheap gas, we have cheap nat gas, so we don't need nuclear like Poland needs nat gas, or that Poland needs nuclear. Other countries need it more than the U.S. needs it. So the question is, will nuclear have to, small modular reactors in particular, will they have to succeed overseas before they succeed in the U.S.?
Good question. When I was in a hearing, I was attending a hearing for advanced reactors to be allowed in California a couple weeks ago. One of the representatives asked, are any of the advanced reactors built here in the U.S.? Can you show me which one that has been built? If we're going to be talking about California deploying, what does that look like? I would hope that it doesn't take for us to build overseas for us to do it at home. However, we know that FOMO is really motivating for people and for the US, and for maybe those that are a little bit more nationalistic. If others see a successful project in a different country, Americans are going to want it here back at home. And I think there's a lot of pressure on the project that will be built here in the US. We promise that these things are going to deliver and they're going to be better.
Right. So FOMO, fear of missing out, right?
Yeah.
So this not to be confused with FOAC, first of a kind, but so with first of a kind, let's talk about the AP1000.
Yes.
And Vogtle. It's great news that Vogtle 3 came online, right, and is now producing power on the grid. But massive cost overruns, massively over time in terms of how long it was expected to take to build it and how long it actually took. Vogtle 4, I think, is beginning hot fueling now, and so that likely will come on, I think, by the end of the year or maybe early 2024. Yeah. So these are positive moves, but is it let me switch, because I think that talking about these future reactors is one thing. Let's talk about the existing reactors.
Big babies. Let's talk about them.
Before we go there, so what are the biggest hurdles in the U.S.? I see three, and I'd put them in NRC, the regulatory issues. Second is the supply chain, and then third is the fuel, right? Where are you going to get the HALEU, for instance? If you handicap that for me, is my assessment, does that ring true to you in terms of what are the big obstacles in the U.S.?
Yes. And, back when Maddie and Mark were working together, when I was getting excited about nuclear, I'm like, okay, well, why aren't we building these? Like, this is really cool. Like, maybe the conservative states are building them, maybe if it's not in California. And, as we were learning together, and they were saying, we have lost a lot of the manufacturing capabilities, not only with nuclear, but other things. And that has brought benefits in some. And I think now we're looking that we do need to bring them back. So what you just said, those three factors, I would say are the biggest hurdles. And I think commitment as well, right? Like each state has its own thing that it kind of wants. And then we have the federal, and the US is a very large country. So it's a little bit easier to do a nationalistic nuclear program in another country, I think, sometimes, because we have so many people, so many differing opinions, and because there's such a huge, I think right now we're all a little triggered by each other, the Democrats and the Republicans, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's a key point, and it's one that I think is important and I want to follow up on that, because as you look around the world and you see, where is nuclear succeeding? Well, and which countries are being able to deploy nuclear and doing it at scale? Well, it's China and Russia in particular, Rosatom being the obvious example. But these are state champions, right? These are national champions, and the same you could say of the South Koreans, right? But you make that point about the federal versus the state. Are we going to have a more nationalistic nuclear policy? I mean, we've had some good regulation come out of Congress in support of nuclear, but I'll ask it this way, is that legislation enough, or are we going to have more federal involvement, more federal backing to really deploy nuclear at scale in the U.S.?
I think there's going to, whether it's through actual policy or maybe even just talking about it on a national scale. Last year, Jennifer Granholm came out in support of Diablo Canyon, saying we need to keep all existing nuclear online in California. I believe that would be small hindrance. It would be a mistake.
Right.
Seeing us being able to point back to Jennifer Granholm, Secretary of Energy, was a big thing. And I think that did play a role in Gavin Newsom allowing himself to change his mind. It gave him the oxygen to say, oh, okay, it's good. We're good. Biden came out. So I think even just talking about it is a great first step on all national levels, whether you're holding a position of power, because and also it's a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats can come together on nuclear. It has happened in other states. In Illinois, they're currently on the path to repeal the moratorium, and they have people on both sides of the aisle. California, not so much. We're not there yet, but we are seeing a slight shift. So I don't know how much national push we'll need, but there needs to be support for those states that want it. I think that's going to be key.
So talk about California, because you're a native Californian, and a lot of people believed, well, it was hopeless that Diablo Canyon would be saved, but it has. And in fact, there's been now the NRC has said that the plant could operate past 2025 while PG&E applies for a license extension. I don't think I have all my terms exactly right there, but that's the gist of it, right? That plant was scheduled to be closed by 2025. The NRC, that was it, but now they could potentially extend it. How important, and this is a plant, I've thought about it in these terms. Forget that it's a nuclear plant. Remember, it's 10% of the generation capacity in California. I mean, by itself, right? Why, red, orange, green, yellow, gas, coal, whatever. Don't close 10% of your generation, right? We need this. So what about, how significant, I'll put it this way, this question this way, how significant was that victory that Diablo Canyon was saved, and it was saved in California?
I mean, it was monumental. Advocates.
And did you think you could save it? I mean, did you believe deep down, did you think it was possible, or did you ever give up and think, well, this is not going to happen?
I believed, I was like, there's no way that we can close it. Even if you don't want it, there's no way you can close 10% of our electricity source, because we've had rolling blackouts back in 2020. And then each year it's like, oh, we're teetering, like everybody use less. Like they're putting so much effort into these efficiency resource. What is it called? I forget.
Demand response.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Which is amazing. And I spoke at an event last week, and there were these utility people talking about, we're going to demand response. And I thought, for nearly the entire history of the utility sector, and I'm a fan of Ready Kilowatt, and Ready Kilowatt's in our film Juice, and, dancing around and encouraging women particularly to use more electricity. And now suddenly utilities say, oh no, use less. And I'm thinking, well, wait just a darn minute. Your whole business is why would you, when do grocery stores or McDonald's say, don't eat our Big Macs? We want you to eat more, point. Right? Why else would you tell your customer to use less? What other industry does this? But that whole thing in California, I mean, it goes back to kind of where you thought you started with this idea. Oh, well, we'll just use less. We'll grow organic vegetables, and we'll be vegans, and we'll all camp out more. And, but so you never lost hope. You always thought Diablo would stay open.
Yeah, because I think I was like, there's just no way. You can't do it. You're not it just wouldn't happen. But I will say, like you mentioned, everybody else that we talked to was like, oh, don't die on that hill. Our friend Isodope came to us and had said, we were one of the last ones on the list, but nobody else had said that they were doing work for Diablo Canyon. And we're like, yeah, we're doing work for Diablo Canyon. We're always down for it. And so it was a very small core group. And then over the last 2 years that I tweeted about it, the opening message that I started the WhatsApp with, and I said, hello, everyone. Welcome to the WhatsApp that's going to save Diablo Canyon. And that was the group. And it can make me cry because it was over 2 years. Some of the months, 6 months period, nothing was happening, but we were still in contact, meeting every week. And when I speak to advocates around the world, they're like, California is well known in many places. And they're like, oh, I don't know about Diablo Canyon. Are you guys going to save it? And everybody felt that joy because we knew how much of an uplift and what a battle it would be in California. What I will say, though, is what we're seeing in many countries is, the fear of blackouts and also not having enough electricity for your people does not look good on your political career, right? Especially
Right.
if you have aspirations to be president one day,
Right.
which Daddy Newsom probably does. And he was the one that specifically had ordered Diablo Canyon and PG&E to not resubmit their license. He
Right.
said, we're not going to do this. And so, although we did have a role in that and we were there when it mattered most, our group did go on the hearing call where his people had told us we do need a pro-nuclear appearance. We need attendance from you all because this will be a signal to the governor's office.
Right.
We need to be there. And we were there. All of the people that called in, we were the ones. But I will say that Newsom was scared of blackouts and his team was like, this is energy reliability is at stake. And we'll take it though.
So ultimately pragmatism won out.
Yes. And I was like, that was my reasoning for having hope. I was like, they can't do it.
I was just watching as you were recounting this, and there was a look on your face where you went right back there, and it was kind of a sweet moment where I could see, and you were on the verge of tears, that I could just see it in your face. My guest, by the way, Station Break Paris Ortiz Wines. She is the global director of Stand Up for Nuclear. She's easy to find on Twitter, Stand Up For, that's the numeral 4 nuclear. Twitter, Stand Up for Nuclear, and then on the web at standupfornuclear.org. So that's Diablo, and it's a big win, and it's possible that, it should, by any reasonable, for a state that is committed to climate change, it would be, again, staggeringly stupid to close it. But let's talk about Palisades. This is one of the other, we'll ignore Indian Point, which is still a sore point for me because I've been to that nuclear plant. The closure of that is criminal. And shame on you, Natural Resources Defense Council, and shame on you, Riverkeeper, for your heinous role in the closure of those 2 reactors. Yep. But there is a possibility now that the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan could come back online, which to me is interesting, which would really be a Lazarus moment because here's Holtec, a company that took over the reactor, the plant from Entergy, has now applied to get the plant reopened. I don't know much about this. Do you have a status update on what's going on with that?
Yeah, so background on that, we did have a small group working for the year and a half before Palisades did officially close. And what I will say, the morale was down. Many of the workers at the plant, those in the community, are like, it's a done deal. Like, we've already tried fighting. It's too close. So when it did close, there was this sense, we did have individuals talking to Holtec saying, there might be some reopening. So when that did come out, I believe the governor of Michigan was like, yeah, I'm for it if they can figure it out. Like, people are like, oh, okay, if you can make it work, we're down. So the last I've seen of it, they have applied they had a hearing a couple weeks ago and talking about what that process would look like if they would like to reopen it. And I'm excited for that. I don't know what it would entail. I don't know what a reopening looks like in the US of a plant.
I don't either. And it's Governor Whitmer, Gretchen Whitmer, and she had written a letter before the plant closed seeking to keep it open. And to me, what was interesting about that as well, and really a key, was that it's in the PJM ISO, and PJM said, we're short generation. This is, and the closure happened despite PJM saying, we don't have enough juice here, and we're looking out at the future and seeing more coal plants closing. We need this plant. And yet it was closed anyway. My understanding is Holtec doesn't have an operator's license, and that's one of the issues. But again, I'm not familiar with all of the details in
so
that.
Somebody would have to come in, nuclear company. So maybe it's Exelon, Constellation, or a different.
Right. Operator. So let's talk about renewables for a little while, because you talked about, again, when we first started talking, you talked about solar panels and, using less and the rest of it. The shift, I think there's definitely been a change in how nuclear is perceived by the general public, certainly by millennials like yourself, and I think among baby boomers as well. There's been a shift in the polling data. But here's the question: why are renewables? Why do they have this patina of of acceptability? Why does the public they poll very well, right? The
Yeah.
renewables do. Why is that? Why are renewables so popular in the human psyche in America anyway?
I think because they're basic, right? Wind turbines, you can see them. I can drive past them and they're in multiple spots throughout California. You can see solar panels, right? And the basic use or function of how they work, right? The wind blows and then it turns, and then we have electricity, and then the sun hits them, and then we get electricity. And with nuclear, yeah, I can't just say you do this and this. It's a little bit more technical. And of course, there's more baggage around nuclear and misconceptions that I'm just
Mm,
having to tear down all the time. And you really have to have a finesse about it because you have a very short amount of time when talking to people about nuclear energy. So with solar and wind, they had beautiful marketing. They sold us this vision of like they're simple. We don't have to rely, it's not extractive, at least not for the materials to make the actual components themselves, but we're just with nature. We just take the wind when we need it, and the sun will come when we need it most. And then we're going to put them in batteries. And everybody knows what a battery is. We have iPhones, we have our Macs, and people are now getting EVs. So people are like, yeah, batteries, solar, wind, that's great. But many people, including myself, don't didn't know how electricity worked, how energy works, electricity versus primary energy. God, like Mark really helped break it down for me. So renewables are simple and they had really good marketing. They gave us a vision of like, if you want to harmonize with nature and if you're going to solve climate change, wind turbine and solar panel, like they're beautiful, like they're just so simple.
and fission is not something that you can explain very quickly, or
Yeah, it's like
that
it's
it,
in a concrete dome, it's on a plant, it's really big. It does fission, it heats water. Oh, but there's so many more components to it.
right. Yeah, that was the knock when. So live in Austin, and for years there were a lot of people in this town when I moved to Austin now nearly 40 years ago. They made their political careers by opposing the South Texas project, which
Oh,
Austin owns 16% of. But that investment the city made has been the best return on investment, bar none, that the city has ever made. There's no second place. I mean, it's we're getting power from that plant now for 2 cents a kilowatt hour, something like that. I mean, but the knock was, oh, nuclear is just an expensive way to boil water, right? And that was the kind of just, oh, it's so complicated, right? But
yeah.
yeah, I like the way you thought you think about that, because that rings true to me as well. That, oh, this is simple. We can see these. We can understand how they work. Whereas nuclear, it has to believe. It requires a belief in big systems, big business, and
Yeah.
and to a certain degree, big government. And so I think that's is. Are we going to need that governmental shift at the? Is it correct to think that we're going to need that governmental shift to happen both at the state level and the federal level for nuclear to succeed at new nuclear to succeed at scale in the U.S.?
Uh, I want to say no, but I think so. But but like the South Texas project, and I believe Columbia Station as well, it's more of you have owners, right? So it's more of like a socialist vibe to it, where like we can all kind of be owners of this. So I think maybe in
The
California,
Tennessee Valley Authority.
yes, that one as well. Um, what if we're looking at California, our state and our leaders are going to be like, we need to go nuclear. And then it's going to be dependent on each county, like who's actually, where are you going to site it? Where are you going to put it? And will people want it there?
Right.
Um, and what we saw in our last NRC hearing, we had a pro-nuclear show out of 30 to 11 people in support of Diablo Canyon. And it was local business owners, it was the local teachers, it was the local insurance reps. So once you have it, as we know, it brings an immense amount of not only fiscal support for the community, but that sense of, high paying jobs.
Right. Generational jobs, right? This was
Yes.
one of the issues at Indian Point, right? That you had multiple generations, fathers and sons and nephews working at the plant, and that this would over decades. And whereas the jobs around solar and wind are temporary, right? And very, very fleeting, a lot of them very transitory.
Right. And have the half the ionization rate as nuclear.
Right. So what do you think about fusion? We've been talking about fission, and there's a lot of money going toward fusion. What's your take on that?
I think it's similar to advanced nuclear as well. Fusion still hasn't demonstrated that it's, from the engineers that I get to interact with, some of them are really gung ho on it, and that's how they got into fission, was through fusion. And others are like, we've been on the cusp for the last, I don't know, 20 plus years, 50 years. So if it happens, great, but there's still going to be issues with it. And I think similar to the advanced reactor individuals, some of them, fusion has been sold as like, oh, fission's whatever, like fusion's the future. And I just am a little bit skeptical. If it's there and it works and we get to deploy it, then great. But there are issues with fusion that will happen that are similar to fission, the perceived problems.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like, well, fission works. Let's focus on fission right now. We have enough trouble building fission plants. Why are we spending so much time on fusion? I'm not saying we shouldn't try, but I think that there's a lot of, but nevertheless, there seems to be some more momentum behind it.
I think it's because it's sexy, right? It's something new and it's innovative and it's not here yet. And I think for investors, that's part of the pitch. Like, am I investing in a future technology, or is this the old technology? Like, I think that's why a lot of advanced reactor companies have been successful in raising money, because it is new and they
Right.
get to say that they were part of it.
Right. What does the public get wrong about radiation?
Radiation is a part of life. It's everywhere. It's in our food. We ourselves are a bit radioactive, and background radiation, I think people just don't hear radiation and immediately connect it to cancer. But of course, not the cancer life-saving, but to the cancer, excessive radiation can lead to cancer. That's what I thought when I saw the Chernobyl accident, was reading up on it. I was like, oh, it's going to give me cancer. So with radiation, I answered a question at the Nuclear Now screening. I was like, it's a part of life. And I think once we know more about it, it's so easy to detect, we're able to detect it. And then also just looking at some simple charts of like the radioactive dose, CT scan, you get radiation when you fly across in the airplane. I think just people don't know about it. We think radiation, we don't have to put much thought to it.
So then to overcome that, it's going to require that continual reminder about bananas and flying and all these other things is that going to be required to allow nuclear to succeed then, to get people to understand that, as you say, it's everywhere?
Yes. And what has been successful in my experience when speaking to individuals, I said, like everything in life, it depends on how, too much of anything is not really good. So if we're looking at radiation, some is good, but if we're looking at if there's a nuclear accident, it always depends on, how high of the dose and then for how long you're being exposed to. And we're able, because we've studied it so intensively, we know how to limit that and to get people out, or your shift's done, and how to clean up and how to maintain it. And I think if you go to Covra in the Netherlands, which not everybody can go, only to say I can bring back these stories and say you can go visit.
I'm sorry, what is that in the Netherlands?
So Covra is the radioactive waste depository in the Netherlands.
Covra, Covra?
Yes.
Covra in the Netherlands. Okay, I wasn't familiar with this. I've seen pictures of you next to the big casks. Is that where?
Yeah, this one is the one where you can walk over it. So their high level waste and their cans are in the floor, and so you can walk over. And they host not only the high level waste, but low and intermediate waste, which people don't really talk about when they talk about waste. They're just talking about one that comes out of the reactor.
But I think that's where I've seen other photos of you standing next to the cask, and you're kind of standing there with the Carol Merrill kind of pose next to this. So demystifying, I guess, then we have to demystify both the waste and the issue of radiation to get more public acceptance. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, and I believe images and videos are very successful. The Nuclear Now film, although I wasn't on board with all the aspects of it, I thought it was a beautiful piece, that it was 110 minutes. You can show to people and it laid it all out for you. And as we know, images and videos do more work than what we can, let's say, in 60 seconds with an individual. And then I can ask questions. So what we continue to do, images, and then also just talking about nuclear itself. People are like, oh, it's not weird. It's not that dangerous. If this cool girl is talking about nuclear, it must not be that bad.
Right. Gotcha. So the nuclear now, just to be clear, people haven't heard of it. So the new film by Oliver Stone, who worked on it with Joshua Goldstein. It's out now. I don't know. Well, I know it had the national release on May 1st. I don't know if it's available now or where, but I'm sure you can find it. So just a couple more questions. And again, my guest is Paris Ortiz Wines. She's the global director of Stand Up for Nuclear. You can find her and her group on Twitter at standup4. That's the numeral 4 nuclear. And then on the web at standupfornuclear.org. So, Paris, what drives you?
What drives me? I think just the joy of life, right? I have such good things to look forward to. I have a great community. I have a great partner. I love to travel, and I get to do the work with nuclear energy, and that allows me to live my life guilt-free a little bit, in the sense of I'm doing something that matters and will make an impact. And so I want to keep living my life with as much joy and as much hope as I can. And I think my career allows me to do that.
So is there an end point though when you look at this? Is this you think this is going to be your career? I mean, you're 28, you said that before. And
Yeah.
do you think you could do this for 20 years, 30 years? I mean, is this the passion is this your life purpose?
I think if it, let's say I get out of nuclear tomorrow, I think I would still be involved in the advocacy efforts in my local state. I think it will be something that I will forever push, because energy is the foundation of human society and allows human flourishing, and for us to conserve as much land as we can if we look at the most energy dense technology. And it will always be an issue. We're gonna have, this will be the issue of our lifetime. How are we gonna get enough clean energy so that we limit fossil fuels? And so regardless, let's say I get fired or I don't have enough money, I'll still do it on the side. I'll still volunteer, because it brings me hope.
Well, I'll come back to that in a minute, but you mentioned the issue of land use, and this is one that I've been tracking for a long time, and I've traveled a fair amount around the U.S. And I was just in Iowa last week, and before that I was in Wisconsin, and meeting with people who are trying to protect their neighborhoods against the encroachment of these big renewable projects. Yeah. And to me, this is one of the things where, and I'm just going to riff for a second, and I'm sure I'll formulate a question here, but it's stunning to me to see how the legacy and alt energy groups, the legacy climate change groups, are so and I'll use this word, in bed with big business and big banks, and at looking at steamrolling rural America and covering vast amounts of land. I just look at it and I think, what are you doing? Well, I'll put it to you this way: has that legacy environmentalism just lost its way, in that it seems to me they've directly, in a very real way, have lost their connection to the actual dirt, to the land. That's my view. Does that rhyme with how you see it? Because you mentioned land use for the first time there in when you were talking about this. How do you see this? Because these land use conflicts are huge in California.
Yeah, I think there's been, I think there's been a lot of cherry picking with the left. So I live on the coast. I'm in Berkeley, and this coastal elitism idea is true. I think back in the day, I was like, well, if we can't put the wind turbines near here, we need to put it where we have the most land, and those people just need to suck it up because they need to do their part, right? So
that's the sentiment. Those people need to suck it up. They need to do their part. Yeah, right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And climate change is like, it's been, anytime you try to question whether or not, why they're not protecting these lands, or why they're pushing this like bad project, or why we need renewables and not nuclear, it's like, because climate change. It's been used as this excuse to possibly do some irresponsible damage in producing some of these projects. And I actually had the privilege of speaking with a couple of these groups that have been affected by the wind industry. And it's divided families. Once you get a wind turbine out on your sector, they control that for the 25 plus years. You can't do anything around it. And honestly, I wouldn't want to live near these wind turbines either. Like, I get we're like, oh, they're fine. We need them for climate change. But honestly, I'd rather live near a nuclear plant because it's that one building. I don't want these wind turbines. And there's also, as you know, there's many effects to the natural ecosystem. These wind turbines are put in these wind corridors where it is migratory paths, and they have been killing birds, especially the one up here. I believe it's
Altamont Pass.
Altamont Pass, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. You can go on there and see all the dead apex predators that it's killed. It's a horrible project. So just the point would be, I see it. I thought the same way, suck it up. And I think we get to cherry pick of which communities we want to defend. Right.
And the wealthy ones get defended.
Yes, the wealthy ones. And then also, I think there's, at least with California, it's very diverse. So we do like to prioritize people of color communities, which rightfully so. But I think we forget that there's another factor that plays into this, which is class and economic status. We have a lot more in common, those that share the economic class, because they have some of the same struggles.
Right.
And of course, there's other layers of ethnicity, but I think there's just a divide between rural and city, and we have it in California, and there just we don't really mix.
Right.
And so I think we just get to make these decisions up in the air and don't know who they affect because, oh, we just drive past their towns when I go down to LA.
Right. Yeah, I agree. There's a huge urban rural divide, and I think it's growing. So last two questions, Paris, what are you reading? What books are on the top of your list?
I am reading The Color of Law. It is written by a Berkeley professor, and it basically is describing the whole setup of how we basically instituted racist policies as far as housing wise, how realtors were in on it, bankers were in on it, the feds were in on it, like every level. It's a great book and not too dense for me. So that's what I've been reading. And then at nighttime, I'll read my Harry Potter books. I'm starting to reread them.
Aha. You talked about this, or you touched on it just a little bit. So The Color of Law, so really about redlining, exclusion, which is an issue that Jennifer Hernandez has worked on quite a lot, who's been on the podcast and has done a lot of work on that, as well as Robert Apodaca, who's been on the podcast, and people with the 200, who in fact are suing California on several different lawsuits. So last question, Paris, what gives you hope?
I would say besides nuclear, it would be my community, my friends and family. I'm surrounded by great people, and they get to do amazing things in their own ways, and I get to share with them in that. And then also I get to bring what I get to do. So I think it's very human, right? We're very social creatures, and it matters on not only your mental, but your physical health of whether or not you have a community and you have people.
Well, that's a good place to stop. My guest has been the charming Paris Ortiz Wines. She is the global director of Stand Up for Nuclear. She's based in Berkeley, California. You can find her on Twitter, StandUp4, that's a numeral 4 nuclear, and on the web at standupfornuclear.org. Paris, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Power Hungry podcast. Thanks for your time.
So fun, Robert. I'll see you soon.
Okay, and thanks to all of you in podcast land. Give us a good rating. Give us 5 or 12 or 16 stars on that rating thing. And if you haven't done it, follow me on Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. And until the next episode of the Power Hungry podcast, see ya.